I want to talk about what it is that parents should be looking for as they research whether or not they can have vaccines. One is the reactions are relatively small compared to the number of vaccinations that are done. Would that be correct?
Well, we really have no idea, because what happens when someone suffers a vaccine reaction is they go off to their doctor says, oh no, it's coincidental, and it never gets reported. Or the doctor looks in the literature, finds that there's never been a report of this particular reaction to this vaccine, and says, oh no, it couldn't be, so doesn't report it. If it doesn't get reported, then other doctors don't hear about it. So everybody says, oh no, it's coincidental. No one investigates. Most of them we have here in New Zealand, as in most Western countries, a passive reporting system. There's no requirement to report a vaccine reaction, even if it's only suspected. No one investigates, so there's never anything proven. So it's very easy for those with a vested interest in promoting vaccines to say, oh, well, no, they don't cause reactions, we've never heard of that. When they do safety studies, they don't do long-term safety studies. Many of the safety studies on vaccines only last for 7 days. Some of them are shorter than that. And what they do is they compare the incidence of reactions alongside another vaccine, not a placebo. So, for example, when the Hib, or Haemophilus influenza type B vaccine, was developed, it was compared with reactions to the Hep B vaccine, and they said, "Oh, it's safe. It doesn't have any more reactions than placebo." But the placebo was another vaccine. The control was another vaccine.
Right.
It's totally invalid science. If you really wanted to know about reactions, you'd do long-term safety studies, and none have been done, and you would compare it with a placebo. So you'd inject something that was, saline into someone instead of a vaccine. But what they do is they compare it with other vaccines. And now children receive so many vaccines at once that if there's a reaction, you have no way of knowing which one it's to. So it's easier for them to say, oh, no, it's coincidental.
Tell me, where should parents go for help, and what are some of the key questions they should be asking? And thirdly, can they say no to something like measles, mumps, rubella, that immunisation, because it is such a big immunisation to be plugging into your kids?
Where do they go, starting at the beginning, where do they go for information? That's hard to answer in a short period of time. Obviously, people go to the internet a lot, and there's a lot of misinformation out there on both sides. So I think parents need to be fairly wary, and I also wouldn't make a decision based on the say-so of one person.
No.
I do public talks, and I always say to people, you need to do your own research. Don't take my word for it. In the same way as I'm suggesting that you don't just take your doctor's word for it, don't take my word for it either. Go out, read, find books, talk to people, find out the information. Personally, I go to the original medical papers. I go online and I find medical papers, but I trained as a scientist, and that's probably easier for me to do than for many people to do. It's not just about knowing where to look, it's knowing how to read a paper, how to interpret it, what's useful. One of the things that I find most useful is looking at the conflicts of interest and who's funding a study to know whether or not there are any biases in the way that the paper is presented. So there's lots of places you can get information, there's lots of good books and so on, but I think the important thing is that you keep looking until you're satisfied with the answers. You do not have to vaccinate your children in New Zealand. It is your right to say no.
Will it stop them from being able to go into certain schools or certain daycare centres, etc.?
I've never personally found it a problem. Your child cannot be prevented from attending a state school because they're unvaccinated. At worst, if you do not provide an immunisation certificate, they will be listed as unvaccinated unless you prove that they are. And the worst that can happen is that in the event of a measles or a whooping cough outbreak, they can be sent home from school for up to 2 weeks at a time for, I believe it is just two times. As has happened in West Auckland recently. But they can't prevent your child from attending a state school or a state institution on the basis that they're not vaccinated. The private area is probably a little less clear-cut. Personally, as I said, I've never had any problem, but I think if they actually approach individual organisations and explain their decision, I mean, even in the US where it's mandated, there is still the opportunity to refuse on the basis of philosophical, medical, or religious reasons. As I said, in New Zealand, you are required by law to provide an informed consent, which carries with it the right to refuse any medical treatment. So you definitely can say no to vaccines. You can say no to one, you can say no to all of them, you can choose when your child has them, what the time frame is, you can choose to have one at a time spread out 6 months apart if you want. That is your right. It may not be what the doctors and the Ministry of Health would want you to do, but you can, and you can turn them all down if you want to.
Yeah, on your, thank you very much for your time, actually, by the way. I think it has been hugely helpful. I really appreciate it. And you sound like, A, you're very passionate about it, and secondly, you really know what you're talking about. You're not trying to scare people away from vaccines, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And if you want more information, go to the website, ias.org.nz. There you'll find a whole lot of information and links globally to pro-immunisation and informed choice websites as well. So as Sue said, do your homework, do your research, and know what you're doing, because your kids have been given to you to look after, and you need to make sure you're making wise choices.